Hello and welcome to the Monday Agenda. As you're aware, Tanzania has taken the chairmanship of the SADC, and we are delighted on the program today to have with us Ms. Gladys, who is the Secretary for International Relations from Movement for Democratic Change, all the way from Zimbabwe. Hello and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you so much. So the SADC and the fact that Tanzania has now taken the chairmanship under the leadership of His Excellency John Pombe Magufuli, what does this mean to the continent, the member states of the SADC?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the fact that Tanzania has taken over the chairpersonship has sentimental value to the region, especially when you look at the fact that at the formation of the Southern African Development Community, you had, your former president, Julius Malemo Nyerere,
Correct.
Being at the forefront in terms of defining the kind of trajectory that the region had to take at that particular time. So the fact that the chairpersonship is coming, I think it's for the second time that is coming to Tanzania. The first time it was under President Mkapa,
yes,
and this is the second time it's coming to Tanzania. So there's a lot of sentimental value, but also Tanzania is a country that is so dear to the region.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the role that Tanzania played in the liberation of the region, again under the leadership of Julius Malemo Nyerere. So it's very dear to the region, and there's a lot of sentimental value. Going forward, though, would implore to the current chairperson, President Magufuli, to make sure that he pays attention to the hotspots in the region.
All right.
And coming from Zimbabwe, where the situation is not looking good, you have deteriorating social and economic challenges that are posing a threat, not just to Zimbabwe, but to the region. If you look at what is happening in South Africa in terms of the xenophobic attacks, which are also ramifications of what is happening in Zimbabwe.
No.
If you have hotspots where people are running away from their own governments, like in Zimbabwe, coming over to Zimbabwe, to South Africa, and then the locals feeling that there's a challenge in terms of them not getting the jobs that are being taken by foreigners. So we need to be able to look into the root causes of some of these issues rather than scratch on the surface and say the South Africans are not giving the necessary solidarity to the people of Southern Africa. We need to look at the causes, and it is our thinking as the MDC that the regional leadership will be able to look into these issues and address the political questions of the day. For instance, in Zimbabwe, where there is a lot of political instability.
Mm-hmm. This is the 39th summit. That means we've had 39 chairpersons of SADC. Tanzania is the 39th. Do you think the bloc SADC is not doing enough to address these potholes or these red spots, as you mentioned?
I would say yes, the regional bloc has played a role. Talking about my own country, Zimbabwe,
Mm-hmm.
The regional bloc came in 2009 after the sham election that we had in 2008, where a lot of people were killed. A lot of our members were killed by the ZANU-PF government. But the regional bloc came in and facilitated an inclusive government, where the opposition, my political party, was actually part of that government. So yes, they have played a role. It's unfortunate that when they pulled out, we had not really implemented the necessary, political and economic reforms that were needed to move the country forward. So I think SADC is doing, a lot of work, but I also feel that SADC has to be proactive in terms of how it responds to this political instability that is happening in the region. Rather than waiting for the situation to deteriorate, rather than waiting for dead bodies to be in the streets for SADC to intervene, I think it's important for them to be proactive, have some kind of early warning, system where they're able to pick out, hotspots well in advance and then get in before there is total catastrophe. And Zimbabwe, for all intents and purposes, all the ingredients for total disaster are there. You have instability that is within the ruling party, where the political elites are not actually agreeing, following the fall of President Robert Mugabe. Mm-hmm. You have a vice president and a president that are not agreeing in terms of how to move forward. And a lot of factionalism that is causing a lot of instability in the country. You have the social and economic situation. We are going for more than 18 hours without power. Okay. People are so impoverished. There are human rights abuses. As I'm talking to you right now, we have people that were abducted in Zimbabwe belonging to our party, the Movement for Democratic Change. We wanted to do a march on, just displaying our displeasure with what is happening in the country. We wanted to do a peaceful march on March 16. It was banned by the police. The police condoned our headquarters. So all of those issues are ingredients for total catastrophe in the countries, and would think that it is the role of the Southern African Development Community as a regional body that is also tasked to look at peace and security issues, to then step in and assist the Zimbabweans in terms of making sure that the situation does not further deteriorate.
And of course, not to forget to mention that if it's happening in the Southern Africa, it could also happen in the Eastern Africa. It could, it could move to any of the member states. Mm-hmm. Now, if you are to weigh between the concentration of efforts in the bloc, mm-hmm. the SADC, would you then reckon that they do much more efforts towards the political aspects of the countries or the member states, or the economic and social aspects of the member states? Because if you are to ask me, and my mm-hmm. very little judgment, I would say mm-hmm. probably the focus is more on to ensuring that countries are happy to be members of the bloc of the SADC. Mm-hmm. So if you are to weigh, where do you think the SADC relies most of its strength on?
That's an interesting question, but I think we need to understand the indivisibility of rights. When we are talking about human rights, we are talking of both socio-economic rights, cultural rights, but also political and civil rights. So it's important to balance those rights, because if you just focus on the political and civil rights without focusing on the socio-economic rights, you then negate, other rights. And sometimes by negating one side of the human rights, you are actually negating even the other side. I'll give you an example. If someone does not have access to information that can impede on their right to, to social and economic rights, so you need to understand that these rights are linked and they are intertwined. Having said that, I kind of feel like when I look at the agenda of the Southern African Development Community, I feel that yes, at a normative level, you can say that there has been focus maybe on the political side of things, mm-hmm. but actually, I don't think that SADC has been paying attention to the civil and political rights, okay. which is why, or much attention rather. They've not been paying much attention to civil and political rights, which is why, we have all of these issues that we are talking about in Zimbabwe in terms of rights such as the right to associate, which we think, the right to assembly, which we think as the MDC we have not enjoyed those rights in Zimbabwe. So definitely there's need to focus on those issues. We have protocols in SADC, such as the SADC guidelines on democratic elections. And we think this is an area also where SADC states have been, found wanting. If you look at the election that we had in Zimbabwe in 2018 in August, yes. It didn't abide by the provisions of that particular protocol, of that particular instrument. We had partisan distribution of food aid. We had partisan institutions, including the electoral management body that was actually running elections. It was so brazenly partisan in support of ZANU-PF. Okay. We had media that was so biased, especially state media, bashing the opposition, not giving us enough space to share our views. And this is contrary to the provisions of the SADC guidelines on democratic elections. So it's important for SADC to focus on its own instruments and to make sure that member states actually abide by those instruments. This is the reason why we have problems in Zimbabwe. We have had a number of elections that are contested, and that's the center of the problem.
Okay.
So from where we sit, we think the problem is a legitimacy question, where the power to govern is not derived from the will of the people. That is where the problem, which is why we now see the lack of confidence. Citizens don't even feel comfortable to put their money in the banks because they don't trust the system.
Okay.
So if you don't put the fundamentals in place, which is a free and fair election where people are able to vote and where their will is actually respected, we have seen that the SADC is also focusing on industrialization. And
that's correct. That's the theme for the 39th summit.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's important, but we also need to understand that without the fundamentals, without dealing with the political question, it will be very hard. In Zimbabwe, for instance, our issues are purely political.
Okay.
There is a political crisis, and there is no way that we can proceed to then industrialize. In fact, we are we're doing totally the opposite.
Okay.
The industries are shutting down because of the challenges in our politics.
Maybe before we indulge into industrialization a little bit, not very much. You have His Excellency John Pombe Magufuli, the chairman of the SADC, now watching and listening to you. What more should he do? What more he's the leader, he's the chair. What more should the bloc do to address the challenges that you're bringing to
Great
the
question.
Yeah.
I think what we are asking from SADC is very simple. We want SADC to be more proactive. We want SADC to intervene in the case of Zimbabwe. Right now, we have citizens, more than a third of our citizens are facing starvation. The United Nations has actually made a call following, a food crisis that the country is facing. So we want SADC to look into these issues, to intervene, provide a platform for dialogue among the political actors in Zimbabwe. We are aware that President Mnangagwa has some form of dialogue that is going on at the present moment, but we don't recognize that dialogue because it's not mediated.
Okay.
You cannot be calling, for dialogue, yet you are also, we are also disputing your very leadership.
Okay.
The existence of your leadership. So what we're saying is we need a mediated process, and SADC can actually play a role in terms of providing that platform for dialogue for political actors in Zimbabwe. It needs to be credible, it needs to be bankable, and scaffolded by the international community. So that's what we are asking. And as the Movement for Democratic Change, we have produced our own document, our strategy document, which is called RELOAD, basically Return to Economic Recovery, Legitimacy, Openness, and Democracy.
Okay.
And it has five signposts. The first signpost is pressure, which is exactly what we are doing here. Exerting pressure on the regional leaders to intervene, exerting pressure also internally, which is why we are doing our peaceful marches, to send out messages that we are not happy with what is happening. The pressure to do what? Number two, the second signpost. The second signpost is to have dialogue that is credible, that is bankable, dialogue that is scaffolded by the international community. And that dialogue, number three, which becomes the third signpost, is to achieve comprehensive reforms.
Mm-hmm.
We have areas where we have identified that are in need of comprehensive reforms, political reforms, economic reforms. And political reforms around, elections, electoral reforms, media reforms, making sure that, our media is open to everyone who wants to use the media, security sector reform, because also the challenge in Zimbabwe is the role of the military in civilian affairs.
Okay.
I think you might be aware of that on August 1, we had people that were killed, 6 people that were shot dead by the military. And actually, one of your generals here was part of a commission that was set up by the government to to investigate what actually happened.
Okay.
And it was led by the former president of South Africa, Motlanthe. President Motlanthe then produced a report, and up to now, 1 year after, the government has not implemented, the recommendations, including accountability of the people that killed those 6 people.
Okay.
So all of these are reforms that are important at the third signpost. We also need a national transitional mechanism, a vehicle through which we actually implement these reforms. And then after the implementation of that reform, we get to the final signpost, which is a free and fair election that is internationally supervised, that is not going to be contested, and that sets Zimbabwe on a democratic, developmental trajectory. This is what we are calling for as the Movement for Democratic Change.
Okay. You are watching the Monday Agenda, and with me today is Ms. Gladys, who is the Secretary for International Relations for the Movement for Democratic Change, all the way from Zimbabwe. And she's here with us in Tanzania, having attended the SADC summit, and Tanzania having taken the chairmanship of the regional bloc, one of the largest regional blocs in the world. And we are looking onto issues within the bloc, but specifically looking onto the issues in Zimbabwe, and of course the call that Tanzania, as the chair of the bloc of the SADC, needs to focus on. Ms. Gladys, you had brought the theme for the 39th summit, which is industrialization. And do you think you mentioned a little bit that you're doing the opposite? That means there's absolutely no way a vehicle with 4 wheels, that one goes on the opposite direction and the 3 go on the different direction, then that car would move. So what is your message? What is your call to the chair of SADC with regards to industrialization drive, especially in Zimbabwe? Can this really be attained? Because if we want to drive industrialization in the bloc, it has to be all the member states.
I think the challenge that we have is we are at different stages of development as countries in the region. And from a Zimbabwean perspective, like I indicated, the issues are political. We are, experiencing one of the worst economic crises since 2009. And like I indicated, we are actually deindustrializing as a country. Industries are shutting down. If you look at issues around capacity utilization, it's very low percentages in Zimbabwe. So we have not really looked at the fundamentals. And the fundamentals, as far as we are concerned as the Movement for Democratic Change, is around making sure that we put an end to the political crisis. We need to have a leadership in Zimbabwe that has some kind of a social contract with the people of Zimbabwe. How the governed relate to those that are governed, and those are the basics. In terms of governance, we need to make sure that there is that relationship, and at the present moment we don't have that relationship in Zimbabwe, which is why we have low confidence in government. Citizens do have low confidence. It's a leadership crisis, and we need to address the leadership question, so that at least we then move on to issues around industrialization and catch up with the rest of the region.
The theme for the 38th summit that ended, and now we are on the 39th, focused more on the youth. And I really wish to understand, as now we have our viewers watching, how have the youth been involved in social, political, and economic development in Zimbabwe?
That is a very interesting question, because more than 60% of the Zimbabwean population are young people.
Wow, okay.
And I know that this is there's a similar trend across Africa, actually. The majority of Africans are young people. And definitely it's important to make sure that young people are at the center of development activities in the various member states.
Correct.
In Zimbabwe, we do have challenges. We have more than 90% unemployment.
90%.
Yes,
of
and
the youth.
That is affecting most of the young people.
Okay.
And Zimbabwe, we are a highly educated, country. But I mean, when people leave schools, they don't have anywhere else to go.
Okay.
You find graduates selling airtime in streets, being vendors and things like that. So these are the challenges that we are facing. But again, we go back to the issue that is because of our politics.
Okay.
Our politics, we need to fix our politics for us to be able to create jobs for the young people, for us to fix our country and make sure that we take it back on track.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what is important for us to provide opportunities for young people. We need to fix our economy. We need to fix our politics so that we fix our economy. It provides jobs for our young people.
Okay. Do you feel that the regional bloc is doing much in terms of, Zimbabwe was among the founders back in the 80s. The 79 was the sitting in Arusha here in Tanzania that led to the formation of SADC in 1980. We are almost 40 years now. Do you feel that the bloc is actually doing enough to address the mission and the vision of the founding fathers of the founding nations of the bloc?
I think definitely, as Zimbabwe, we remain committed, even from an MDC perspective. We
That's
really
correct.
remain committed to building regional solidarity, to building networks within the region, because integration is the way to go, given what is happening at a global level. When you look at other countries, the rise of nationalism across the world, and we can only be better as a bloc and not necessarily in our individual silos.
Okay.
So we are really committed as the MDC to make sure that there is regional integration, and we move as a bloc in terms so that we also enhance our competitiveness, and our trade links with the rest of the world.
Correct.
But I feel that there are areas that we need to to also enhance. If I look at the relationship of the Southern African Development Community with the generality of its citizens, I think it's not in a very good space, and I think more can be done.
Okay.
We need to make sure that the Southern African Development Community does not become, a preserve of political elites, but actually speak to the daily struggles that people are facing on a day-to-day basis. So SADC needs to reach out more to its own citizens and make sure that people understand and people buy into the ideas of SADC. So it needs to become more people-driven. Just yesterday, I was at the University of Dar es Salaam, and there was a public lecture organized by SADC and University of Dar es Salaam and another institute. And we had there was this instance where the SADC anthem was sung.
Okay.
And people could not sing it because they don't know it.
That's correct.
You see. So it shows you the work that SADC has to do in terms of reaching out to its own people and make sure that it actually becomes an organization that is not just representing political elites, but that is representing the people of Southern Africa. So I think those are the areas that we also need to be focusing on. Okay.
Understanding, or rather focusing more, one question on MDC. As a political party, how is the party positioned to groom the young people, the over 60% you'd mentioned, of the young people to become better leaders, to become, visionary leaders like, we used to have in the past in our countries?
Great.
Do you have any special programs specifically for youth, to prepare them to, take responsibilities? Yeah.
Good question. So the political party where I'm coming from, the Movement for Democratic Change, it was actually born out of that very, divide between the young people and the older generation.
Correct.
The fact that the young people were not getting spaces in politics, and they were not getting spaces in developmental projects, which is why it was actually one of the mobilizing issues. I still remember myself, I come from the students' movement, and I'm a former student leader, and when we were, mobilizing the students, it was from that perspective, from that understanding, that we need a vehicle that understands where we are coming from as the young people and the challenges that we are facing today.
Yes.
Where, sometimes the older generation does not understand,
Absolutely.
Those kind of issues.
Yeah.
And you might want to know, I'm just 36.
Okay.
But I already sit in the National Standing Committee of the party.
Okay.
And our president is just 41.
Okay.
President Nelson Chamisa is just 41 years of age, and that shows you the kind of party that we are in terms of providing spaces for young people. So we are very much committed to making sure that young people who are in any case the majority. I mean, when you look at the statistics in Zimbabwe, do have space, and we are leading by example in terms of the way that we are structured as a party.
How is the government, the current government of Zimbabwe, giving you the opportunity to thrive as a young person, putting aside a little bit of, the political aspect, MDC, but as a young person, is there room for young people to thrive and be part of the development in the country?
The challenge with Zimbabwe is there is no development at all at the present moment.
Okay.
So it's very difficult for a young person to pursue their dreams because the space is not there. Usually the state is supposed to provide, it's supposed to facilitate a friendly environment for you to do whatever you want
Absolutely.
to do. I mean, in terms of pursuing your dreams. But in Zimbabwe, you don't have that kind of an environment. As a matter of fact, you have policies that are sort of knee-jerk policies that are not well thought out. Just recently, we had a change. I mean, in terms of our monetary policy, where we changed from the multi-currency, system to
Yes.
Zimbabwean dollar,
Okay.
and it was done overnight without thinking, without preparing the people. And it happened again in 2008
Yeah.
when the government just changed, to the multi-currency environment. And a lot of people lost their, savings.
Absolutely.
And so there's no space whatsoever for young people to thrive because of the kind of policies that are churned out by ZANU-PF that are not consultative, that do not, consult the ordinary Zimbabweans and involve Zimbabweans. These are the challenges that we face.
This is the Monday agenda, and with me is Ms. Gladys, who is the Secretary for International Relations from the Movement for Democratic Change, all the way from Zimbabwe, and we are highly delighted to have her with us on the Monday agenda because we're looking onto the fact that Tanzania has taken chairmanship and the fact that Tanzania has the chairmanship and the role that Tanzania should really have to play towards ensuring that there's stability, there's understanding amongst the member states, so that we drive the bloc as one entity. So what would you then call for the takeaways for the 39th summit that just took place in Tanzania? What should then be the focus so that come the 40th summit, we can look back and say, this is what we had mentioned that we would really wish Tanzania to pay attention more onto or focus more onto. And today we are happy to say that 1, 2, 3, 4 have been tackled. This and that. We all want a progression. We all want a step ahead.
I think number one for me is an understanding in SADC that peace is not just the absence of war.
Okay.
Because I think listening to the various SADC leaders, you tend to get a thinking that we pride ourselves in being a peaceful region. And to some extent that might be true, but to some extent that is also true because we are just focusing on the fact that we don't have wars in the region. But beyond wars, I think there's what is called positive peace. Issues of justice, making sure that the kind of peace that we have is actually positive and not negative peace where people are quiet but with a lot of resentments and things like that, because it might then erupt into something that is very bad. So I would think that we need to focus on countries where we see negative peace. For instance, in Zimbabwe, like I've already mentioned. where you can say there's calmness, but that calmness is not really calmness. There are issues that are simmering, and that might actually result into something catastrophic. So, my thinking is that the region must pay attention to the political hotspots, Zimbabwe included, make sure that they intervene with a view, again, to be proactive and not being reactive, to wait for people, for bodies to be on the streets for SADC to intervene. So I think that is one focus. Secondly, I think that SADC needs to roll out a plan to reach out to the ordinary citizens. Okay. We need to make sure that there's a link between what SADC does at the summit level and what the people's aspirations are. We need to make sure that there's a direct link and that it does not become the preserve of political elites. Okay. I think for me, those are the critical areas that we need to...
And these, the ones that you've rightly mentioned, beautiful. Do you think they would then resolve or address some of the issues you raised on the Monday agenda?
Before I go there, there's one other area that I think they should also look at. One of the criticisms that the Southern African Development Community has faced is that they don't speak truth to power. Okay. So...
Speak truth to power.
To power,
okay.
Yes. And what I mean by that is that having frank conversations amongst themselves about what is happening. Okay. So it's important when a member state departs from the founding, principles and values of, SADC as espoused in the SADC Treaty itself, that member states actually, speak out and say this is not the right path that you need to be following. There's a lot of solidarity at times that happens, and that solidarity is not really people solidarity, but it's solidarity at a political elite level. And I think it's important for the leadership to speak truth to power and to have frank conversations amongst themselves on in instances where things are not going on according to plan. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Absolutely, yes.
I think it's an area that we also need to be focusing on. Obviously, the issue that has been raised usually in those platforms is around sovereignty. To say, countries do have, individual sovereignty. They are sovereign countries, and so you can't, get into exactly. But how can states be sovereign when the people themselves are not sovereign? So we need to make sure that what is sovereign, is actually the people's will.
Correct.
And the aspirations of the people of SADC, not necessarily the aspirations of the political elite. So it's important to make sure that they hold each other to account in terms of the agreements that they have made. And I've already touched on one of those agreements, which is the SADC guidelines on governing democratic elections.
Correct. I wish to understand the proactiveness of MDC in terms of, not waiting until there's a summit. That's when you go and seek or lobby to get the attention required. Have you had any approaches to different bodies, governing bodies of the SADC towards addressing or presenting these issues, and have they been positive?
Okay.
Yeah.
So as the MDC, we believe in African solutions for African problems.
Absolutely.
Which is why we reach out to our fellow African brothers in the region, but also at a continental level, to make sure that they understand where we are coming from, to make sure that they understand the issues in Zimbabwe, and then help us to help ourselves. Okay. We have been reaching out to a lot of African countries, both internally. I think you are aware that we have diplomatic missions that are in Zimbabwe, but we have also been reaching out, in terms of out of the country, which is why we are here. Okay. But we don't just come to summits. We engage at a very, deep level, constantly, to make sure that our regional brothers understand the issues that are taking place in Zimbabwe. So, and it's also in line with our reload, which is our strategy that I spoke to earlier on. That we need to build diplomatic pressure, and this diplomatic pressure is mostly on the African continent,
Okay.
because like I said, we believe in African solutions for African problems.
Okay. Again, this Reload, how inclusive is it? Is it just owned by MDC? Did you involve the majority, the people that you're representing in its formation, and they're happy and they're ready to roll with it, or it's it's a party manifesto per se, or it's I wish to understand its inclusivity and acceptability, so that we know, and my viewers can fully understand that you have the blessings of the people of Zimbabwe.
So definitely Reload is a product of many consultations. Consultations that even started in 1999 when MDC was formed. And you'd understand that we were formed as a movement, a movement of Zimbabweans coming from various sectors, civil society, trade unions. Trade unions were very instrumental in the formation of our party, which is why we are a Labour-backed party based on our social democratic values. So we have had many consultations leading to the final document that we now have, which is Reload. But again, yes, it's an MDC document, but that had input from various sectors to make sure that we take on board the concerns of the various sectors in Zimbabwe. Okay.
You rightly said, African problems will only be solved by Africans themselves. Have you had, I also want to understand, and I'm sure our viewers would also be very interested to know if you've had any dialogues with the ruling party, with ZANU-PF, in terms of, bringing up the issues to surface. They, at times, I remember myself once I wanted to get into politics. It was like, it's not the job of the politicians probably do not see much of what is happening around them. They probably know or are aware, but they would not probably have that third eye. Have you attempted dialogues, consultations with the ruling parties and OPF, to put the interest of the people, because at the end of the day, it's the people that you are representing, to put the interest of the people on the table and say, see, 1, 2, 3, 4 is happening. Okay?
Definitely. So just after elections, you might want to know that the Movement for Democratic Change was the first political party to actually call for dialogue. Contrary to what ZANU-PF says, MDC was the first political party to say, we need to dialogue because we've got a political crisis. We need to sit on the table, and dialogue is the only way that we can, that can assist us in terms of moving the country in a trajectory that would want the country to go.
Correct.
But unfortunately, our call was not taken up by ZANU-PF. What ZANU-PF then went ahead to do was to create another platform where people are being called to State House to discuss under what is being called POLAD, which is, I think, Political Actors Dialogue. And we have said as the MDC, we can't be coming to State House. We can't be coming to a dialogue that is called by President Mnangagwa, because we've got a problem in the way that he got to power. Remember, he also, came into power through a military coup. The truth needs to be said. He came to power through a military coup, consolidated through a shambolic election that was not in line with international best practice. So what we want is a credible, dialogue that is mediated by someone who is agreeable by both sides, so that we come to the table on equal footing, not coming to the table, to sort of endorse the president, because that's what is happening with that POLAD dialogue. So we are very much alive to the fact that we need to deal with the issues that are hitting our people in terms of the socio-economic issues, which is why on our second signpost in our Reload, we have said we want dialogue. And we are very much committed to dialogue as the Movement for Democratic Change. But we want dialogue that produces results, not dialogue that is just not there, that is not a serious platform. We cannot be part of that. We cannot be part of that.
And do you, in your opinion now, this will be my very probably final, last but one question, because I need to close with the SADC question, but now that we're looking and focusing more onto MDC, in your opinion, why do you think the government is resisting? Why do you, is not resisting rather, but not responding to your call? They want you to go to the State House and have a talk, but you offer different opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think the government is not appealing to that call?
Because ZANU-PF is not sincere about dialogue. The reason why they're talking about dialogue is because the international community is talking to them about dialogue. And you must understand that with the way the economy is not functioning, ZANU-PF is selling a very discredited narrative that they are a new dispensation, that they are different from President Mugabe. When they were actually with President Mugabe for a very long time, since 1980, they were with President Mugabe. So whatever President Mugabe was doing, he was doing it with this same ZANU-PF people that we have.
Okay.
So they are going around saying that we are a changed lot, we are a new dispensation, and which is why they want to, at a rhetorical level, they want to show that they are a changed lot. And then they talk about dialogue, but without necessarily really meaning it.
Okay.
I mean, the true sense of it, which is why they're playing political games. These are political games that are happening. They are not genuine about it. They don't believe that dialogue is the way to proceed. Okay. And they don't, they think that it threatens their political hegemony as a political party, and they would not want to, let go. That's the reason why they don't want to.
They wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Now, your very last call to His Excellency, the chairman of SADC, John Pombe Joseph Magufuli, your very final call as we wrap up the program.
Thank you very much. Our call to President Magufuli is for him to pay attention to what is happening in Zimbabwe and to intervene. We would really want to see SADC taking a proactive stance in terms of dealing with the crisis in Zimbabwe, creating a platform for dialogue where the political actors can resolve the issues. And the issues, like I emphasized, are political in nature, and we need to come up with a political solution, which is why we think dialogue is the best way to proceed, so that we make sure that Zimbabwe takes itself from the current quagmire and is able to move together with the rest of the region.
And that is the Monday agenda for today. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, with me was Ms. Gladys from the Movement for Democratic Change, who is the Secretary for International Relations for MDC, and we were looking onto the issues that His Excellency John Pombe Magufuli, as the chairman of SADC from the 39th SADC Summit, which took place here in Tanzania, should really look onto, because I personally believe if it happened in Zimbabwe, it could happen in Namibia, it could happen in any of the countries, member states from the SADC, and we cannot move on if there are hiccups in our member states. Until then, I'm your host, Austin Makani, and thank you so much for watching, and thank you for coming to the program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.